Hey everybody, Adam Hawthorne here, and today we're going to be talking about vibrato. What is it, and how to do it, specifically on the saxophone. A couple shout outs before we get started. First, Deborah Rickmeyer and Thomas Snydacker, my two previous saxophone professors, as well as Dr. Nikki Roman, a friend who teaches at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, who introduced me to one of the exercises that you'll see later on in this video. All right, enjoy. Vibrato is a rapid or slight variation in pitch, sometimes described as an oscillating or pulsating effect that singers or instrumentalists used, allowing them to produce a stronger or richer tone. There are many different techniques on how to produce vibrato, depending on what instrument you play or whether you sing. All saxophonists, however, use, for the most part, the same technique, and that is to use a jaw vibrato, or saying the syllable ya while they're playing. To correctly produce this technique on the saxophone, you'll move your jaw down and then back up, almost like a gum chewing motion, or again like the syllable ya. When I'm first introducing this to my students, we'll spend a lot of time in front of the mirror, making sure that the ya syllable is coming from their jaw and not just their tongue. It's very easy to say ya while just moving your tongue, but that won't translate nearly as well to the saxophone. Once my students are able to say that syllable correctly, we'll move to the instrument, where we start with just a jaw scoop, or sometimes called a C scoop. When we first start working on the instrument, I'll have my students play a middle C on the saxophone, and while they're holding that middle C, they'll use their ya syllable, move their jaw down, and then back up. Usually, I will use a tuner app, such as Tonal Energy or Tunable, so that students can see a visual representation of their vibrato. I'll also have them do this exercise with a drone so that they can hear the original pitch that they were playing. Your C scoop should be slow and smooth with rounded peaks and valleys. You don't want to start moving too fast too soon, because that will result in a very jagged vibrato. Once my students can get those rounded peaks and valleys, we'll start speeding up the scoops gradually until we get a reasonable vibrato speed. Now here are a few different exercises that I like to use both with myself and my students to really gain control of your jaw and your vibrato. First, we'll do scales with vibrato. I typically start by having my students set their metronome to 60 beats per minute, still with a drone on the tonic of whatever scale we're practicing. From there, I have students play the scale in either half notes or whole notes with what I call eighth note vibrato, or 2 pulses per note. From here, I'll have the students move the metronome up and back down to gain control of various tempos of vibrato. Once we're very comfortable with eighth notes, we'll move on to triplet vibrato, or 3 pulses per note. After that, 16th note vibrato, or 4 pulses per note. As you or your students are doing this, try to keep the vibrato steady and even throughout the entire range of the instrument. You shouldn't just practice the same scale the whole time. Vary which scale and which octave on the horn that you're practicing as well. Next, we have alternating between straight tone and vibrato, again typically in a scale exercise. Again, your metronome will start at 60 beats per minute with a drone sounding to that scale's tonic. Starting at the bottom of the scale, you'll play a half note of straight tone going directly into a half note's worth of vibrato. This can be either eighth note, triplet, or 16th note vibrato. I'll typically have my students use whatever level of mastery they are at the vibrato scales exercise we talked about before. The challenge here is to learn how to very smoothly stop and start your vibrato. Think of having that first and last pulse be exactly the same as the rest of the vibrato. Again, here's where I will use something like tonal energy or tunable so that students can see a graph of what they're doing. It's really easy to get locked in to what tunable and tonal energy are showing you, which isn't good. But I find that a lot of my students are visual enough that using this really helps them lock that in sooner. Alternating between straight tone and vibrato also allows you to hear the difference in tone between each. It's really important that we make sure that the vibrato is actually enhancing our tone and not making it thinner or detracting from it. Also, this will allow us to hear if there's any difference in pitch. There should be a slight variation so that we can actually hear that there is vibrato, but not so much that we just sound flat. In Larry Teal's The Art of Saxophone Playing, there's actually a visual representation of what basically looks like a sine wave. This is where there's a line in the middle and the vibrato goes equally above and below that line. I wouldn't say that's particularly applicable to what is modern day vibrato in the year 2020. Think more the line being at the top of your vibrato, or maybe going just above the line with the top of your vibrato. Again, with this exercise, you'll move the metronome up and down to try and get comfortable with varying tempos and styles of your vibrato. Next is what I like to call the alternating rhythms exercise. This kind of combines all of the tenets of the previous exercises, both varied rhythms and combining straight tone and vibrato, but it's something that I borrowed from another saxophonist, Dr. Nikki Roman. For this exercise, again, you'll need your tuner and your drone. First, you'll play a half note with just straight tone and no vibrato, right into a half note of eighth note vibrato, or 2 pulses per beat, followed by a half note of triplet vibrato, or 3 pulses per beat, and a half note of 16th note vibrato. You won't take any breaks in between each one. You'll just go straight through, forcing your jaw to get comfortable alternating between speeds right on the drop of a hat. You'll notice that all of these exercises include both a drone and a metronome. While musically, we don't want our vibrato to sound metered or metronomic, we do need to practice it with a metronome to gain control of the muscle as best we can. In addition, Practicing the vibrato with a drone just ensures better intonation throughout the range of the instrument. And without it, we can really fall into the habit of just going flat whenever we use our vibrato super easily. As you're working on your vibrato, it's really important that you listen a lot to other saxophonists, non-saxophonists, singers. So that's where it's important to be listening to masters at your instrument as well as masters of other instruments too. And no one's vibrato is going to sound the same. So it's really important that we start to build our own concept of what we want our vibrato to sound like.
Hey, Scoot. Hey, Scoot, say hi. Thank you guys for watching. Hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, please support the channel by liking and subscribing. And say bye. Say bye, Scoot.